YouTube after a couple weeks. If you don't want to appear on camera, but do want to ask a question, feel free to just type your question into the chat, and Rachel or I will pose the question for you.
Tonight, our guest author is going to be interviewed by Benita Zahn. She is an Emmy Award-winning journalist, the health reporter and a co-anchor for News Channel 13, and the host of Health Beat, and a weekly columnist for the Albany Times-Union. She's a very busy lady, and she's actually going to need to duck out right at 5:30 when her portion of the event ends, so don't be alarmed when she disappears after she finishes asking questions of our guest author. Our guest author this evening is Bridgette Shea, an acupuncturist, Chinese medicine practitioner, and Ayurveda educator whose private practice is an integration of Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine and is located just around the corner from Northshire Saratoga Bookstore. We were incredibly lucky to host a wonderful event for her first book, Handbook for Chinese Medicine and Ayurveda, and I'm delighted to welcome her back digitally in honor of her new book, Cultivating Your Microbiome. A note for people in Saratoga, Bridget is hosting a socially distanced book signing from 6 to 7 at Ageless Acupuncture 2 Franklin Square. Wear your mask. If you already have your copy of your book, you can bring it on over and she'll be happy to sign it for you. Please join me in welcoming Benita Zahn and Bridgette Shea.
Hi there, everybody. This is just great to be able to chat with Bridget again. She was recently a guest on Health Beat with me here at News Channel 13, and you can watch that interview there as well. Pardon. And I just ran off the news from 4 to 5. This is not your mic. This is the mic so I can get back on the air. Bridget, we've got so much ground to cover, but I want to start with, and I know you really would like to share why you got interested in this topic, cultivating your microbiome. And this is the microbiome, as you and I have discussed, is kind of, well, some people look at it as yet one more organ in the body, and it's in some ways the final frontier in our body. So what attracted you to study this?
What attracted me was, I've always been interested in science. And when I studied Chinese medicine, I always was taking the concepts in Chinese medicine and applying them to what I knew from Western medicine. And when I started to get into reading more about the microbiome, what I found was that so much of the research was validating so many of the Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine concepts about how the body works and what we can do to make our body and mind function optimally. And I feel like the microbiome is actually, in a sense, a bridge between not just our mind and our bodies, but between the Eastern medicine traditions and the Western medicine traditions of today.
For those not familiar, the gut microbiome is kind of everything that happens from what we would call the T-line in television down towards your belly button. It's all that stuff.
Right. And so the gut microbiome is specific to the lining of the GI tract, and it largely resides in the small intestine and actually mostly in the large intestine.
And how can we affect it?
We can affect the microbiome in a variety of ways. Every single thing that we put into our mouths affects our microbiome for better or for worse. And not just that, but how well we sleep, whether we exercise or not, and believe it or not, traveling across time zones.
Wow. Do people recognize that their microbiome is out of whack, although you may not realize it's the microbiome that is?
Yes, I think a lot of people do. Any kind of general malaise that people may experience can be attributed to dysfunction in the gut microbiome. Any kind of generalized anxiety sensations, or even just some transient digestive discomfort.
And at this time, when we are all so filled with anxiety, taking care of the microbiome can help ratchet that down, can't it?
It absolutely can. you know, as we are a part of nature, anything that we can do to make ourselves more harmonized with the natural world is going to help us feel better. So right now we're in a space where we're kind of encouraged to not just socially distant, but be distant from nature itself with all the hand sanitizer and the mask wearing and the hand washing. And in the times that we don't need to do those things, when we have the space, we do need to be getting outside more and getting our feet on the ground and looking at the sky and breathing fresh air and observing the trees and the foliage around us, because it actually helps to settle and soothe our nervous system and therefore our mind.
And how does that interact with our microbiome also? Because, you know, sometimes we want to be clean, but being too clean is a problem.
Absolutely. If we were absolutely sterile, we could not survive in this world. And they've done studies on this in the lab. So there is an intricate interaction between ourselves and the plants and trees around us. And the Eastern traditions, it's called forest bathing, where we interact with the ions and the chemicals that the plants are giving off, and they actually help us experience elevated mental states, and they also can help with balancing our immunity.
The Pine Hollow Arboretum down in Slingerlands promotes forest bathing. So if you don't know where to go take this nature bath, and you do that with your feet, your eyes, the feast that way, just drive on down and walk through there. And there are some paths that are really very accessible, not handicap accessible at this point, but very accessible for, you know, families to go with children. What does a diet that supports the microbiome look like, Bridget?
A diet that supports the microbiome is one that's rich in plant-based foods. All foods will support some of the microbial entities in the gut, but one that is rich in plant-based foods contains a lot more fiber, and fiber is the prebiotic, or the actual food that feeds the beneficial microbes in the gut.
You know, a lot of folks just want to go to the store and buy a product that says prebiotic, probiotic. That's not necessarily the right way to go, is it?
Not necessarily. That is, you know, the best way to go is to try and balance your microbiome with your diet, with exercise, with all the things we've been talking about for decades, increasing one's tolerance to stress, decreasing anxiety. These are all things that we need to do to help make our gut microbiome healthier.
You know, and I know fermented food is also high on the list. You know, fiber foods are high on the list. How do they help the quality, the health of the microbiome?
So fermented foods actually contain the little critters that you want in your digestive tract to help regulate your immune system and manufacture enzymes that you need to break down all of your food. So these little, the fermented foods that we eat, by eating them, we're actually taking in more of the beneficial communities that we may already have in our gut, but they just give it a little bit more of a boost.
The Chinese believe this structure, of course, affects our overall physiology.
Absolutely.
A lot of folks don't buy into that. They buy into the give me the pill and let's make it work. So what are I know, go out, take a walk, you know, eat a little better. But how else does that prescription to marrying the East and the West medicine begin to really take hold and take form for our overall health?
Well, I think once we do implement these small changes into our lifestyle, we start to notice that we do feel better. And then we can take more and more steps to feeling better. And another thing that's recommended in the Eastern tradition is to eat every one of the tastes in every meal. And while that may seem like an insurmountable task for some of us, eating all of the tastes at least throughout one day is going to help to feed and balance the gut microbiome.
Okay, translate. What does that mean? What does it look like on the plate?
So that would look like having a little bit of sweet, which can be meats, poultry, fish, pretty much everything that we eat has some element of sweet taste to it. Salty, which can be salts, miso, sour, which can be lemons, limes, some of the fermented things that you mentioned, like sauerkraut. Bitter, which is like dandelion greens, other greens, and pungent, which are onions and garlic and chilies and more hot, spicy things. Those are the primary tastes that are recommended. And Ayurveda has an extra taste called astringent. And this astringent taste is pomegranate seeds and things that taste like that. That's almost a pucker. It's not quite sour. It's a little different than sour. It's got the sour quality to it, but it's got some other flavor to it as well.
And for people who are not familiar with Ayurvedic medicine, Ayurveda, what's the sort of the entry understanding of that?
So Ayurveda means the science of life, and it's basically the name of the traditional medicine of India. And so like we call Chinese medicine the traditional medicine of China, we call the traditional medicine of India Ayurveda.
For parents who want to help their children, is this a good thing for them to do? Is this something they should be introducing into their child's life?
Absolutely. I talk to my daughter about it all the time, and she makes comments quite regularly about what foods are going to feed her good critters in her belly. So I don't think it's too soon. She's only 5, and I've been talking to her about it since she was 3. So I don't think it's too soon to start.
5-year-olds like their sweets. How do you keep kids away from that? Because you want the sweet taste, but you don't necessarily want sweets to.
Well, I talked to her a lot about her critters in her belly, and that we want more good critters than bad critters. And a lot of the bad critters want more candy and stuff like that. And then she's going to not feel as good if she has those things. And she sees the result if she has too much of it. She sees that she feels a little bit more out of control and less settled. So it's
interesting.
Yeah.
Is this something then for kids, and we're not talking, while this is food as medicine, we're not talking about replacing medication here without, speaking with your physician as well. But for kids who have trouble settling, for kids who maybe the school thinks they should be on medication for ADD, is switching the diet, is there research that shows this helps?
There is, and there's anecdotal information on it as well from countless numbers of moms and dads who've done it and have seen results in their children.
Now look, we just came through the summer and it was very hot. So we all liked our iced beverages. But iced beverages not necessarily recommended for the gut biome.
That's right. And there's research that shows that iced food and drinks, iced water, for example, it actually inhibits the enzymatic activity in the small intestine. And so that's what we know from a Western medicine standpoint. But from the Eastern tradition, we say that iced and cold drinks actually diminish our digestive capacity. And so for that reason, they may not have said 2,000 years ago that iced things will inhibit your enzymatic activity, but they did recognize the cause and effect between regular consumption of cold foods and drinks and a diminished digestive functioning.
Where does alcohol fit into this?
So as far as the gut microbiome goes, you'll be pleased to hear that in moderation, alcohol is a prebiotic. There is fibrous substance in alcoholic drinks like wine and beer that actually do feed some of the beneficial microbes in the gut.
Coffee, tea, can we include that in this diet?
Same thing, but it's all about moderation and not overdoing it.
So how do we, after we're going to listen to you, you've piqued our interest, and then we're going to go on our way. What should we be listening to our body before we start to make the changes, if changes need be? So what do we need to listen to hear our body telling us?
I think that a lot of us are already hearing our body telling us things, but we try to ignore it, or we poo-poo it, or think that we're just imagining things. And I would encourage people to start paying attention to those little intuitive hits you get, or those little thoughts you get, the cravings you get, especially if it's for something that is more what we would say, quote unquote, healthy. I don't like to demonize any foods, but some things are definitely a little bit better for us than others. If you're getting an inclination to not have so many processed foods or boxed or frozen foods, and you want to eat things more fresh, then do it.
And look, we should point out there's more than 300 ongoing clinical trials looking at the outcomes of this. It's been around for a very long time, this kind of care, but we're still slow to adopt. There's also no evidence of preventative or curative by embracing this. So let's talk a little bit about preventive right now. We're moving into the cold and flu season. Clearly, COVID-19 is a concern. How does this help us maybe not prevent a specific illness, but ward off illness in general?
Well, from an Eastern medicine standpoint, the function of the gut is the central nexus for the functioning of the rest of the body. There was a Chinese doctor in the 12th century who founded an entire school of thought in Chinese medicine that if there is a healthy spleen and stomach, which is basically if there is a healthy digestion, then there is no pathogen that can permeate and overtake the individual. And this is a huge concept because in the West, we think about, oh, the immune system, we need to boost the immune system or balance the immune system. But really what we're finding with this microbiome research is that it's supportive of what Li Dongyuan said in the 12th century in China, that what's going on in the gut, in the GI tract, is actually going to influence our immunity for better or for worse. And if we can take that angle and start focusing more on what the gut is telling us and starting to change our lifestyle so that we can have a more healthy microbiome, then that more healthy microbiome is going to be what supports our immune system.
Where does sleep fit into this? Is there a certain amount of sleep that we really need to keep our microbiome in top shape?
Yeah, I would say 7 to 9 hours a night, depending upon your constitutional type.
Yeah. I made a note when you and I were having our first interview. I think I would pronounce it Qi, Q-I.
Yep.
Dampness, the Qi stagnates. What does that mean?
So qi is the word that's used in Chinese medicine to describe our vitality. And so that vitality can be energetic. It can be the electromagnetism that flows throughout the body. But a large portion of what qi actually means is what the microbiome is doing. And so the idea in Chinese medicine is that there is this vitality or this animating substance that flows through us that enables us to be cognitively aware, that enables us to move and to function well, and that enables us to maintain a good healthy boundary in our body, aka a healthy immune system. So this qi is oftentimes looked at as some etheric substance that's somewhere out in the mystical universe, but actually it's very tangible. And part of it is, like I said, the microbiome, all of the metabolites that the microbiome secretes that we need to function well, and all of the microbial byproducts and everything in the body that it influences, from the immune system to the brain to the endocrine system.
Bridget, some people have to take medication, Western medication, for myriad reasons. How do we square that with the microbiome?
Well, I always like to give the example from the yogic teachings, which is this concept of ahimsa, and that we should always do what the least harmful thing is to ourselves. So if it's the least harmful thing to take that pharmaceutical that we need, then we should take that. And then we work on what we can from there. Western medicine has its purpose, absolutely. I mean, it's where would we be, you know, if in a situation like COVID-19, in a situation, you know, where there's some kind of an accident or a trauma to the body, we need Western medicine. But I don't think that we should completely demonize it from an alternative medicine standpoint either, which most reputable practitioners do not do. They will refer to Western docs as well, because we recognize that good medicine is all medicine in the right context.
Yeah. And then there's also acupuncture that comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
I like the smile on your face, because I know you've studied that as well. And just a quick, while I've got you smiling, just a quick aside. When I'm feeling good, I will say that and I always get confused. Now I won't anymore. Between my ghee and my ghee, well, ghee, of course, is clarified butter. My ghee will feel good. So now I will never get that wrong again.
Well, ghee feels good too.
I'm sorry?
Ghee feels good too.
See, it's not either or. It's a little bit, as you point out, everything in moderation. Because if one feels that they are somehow, denying themselves something you want, then the research is also there that then we're going to overdo what it is we have been denied. So it's about creating a healthy balance. And let's talk about the role of acupuncture in all this.
Okay. So acupuncture is a modality that is attributed to China, but we're not actually sure where the origin of it is and how far back it goes. But acupuncture is the introduction of tiny, tiny hair fine little needles that I like to actually call antenna, because it's much less threatening. And they contact certain points in the body that people over the millennia have discovered will facilitate a particular healing response in the rest of the system. And so when you receive acupuncture, you're receiving input that's telling your body to send fluids in a certain direction, to send more heat in a certain direction, to eliminate some excess heat or inflammation from the body, or to decrease pain.
And that works along with it. Does that augment the attention to our gut microbiome?
Absolutely, because there are points that we can do to actually boost the beneficial microbe activity in the gut.
So we just have to get started. What's your, if you will, prescription? And I mean that in the broad sense, not in the pad and pen sense.
Right.
What's your prescription for us going forward to do tomorrow morning or even tonight? And as we start to build to ensure that our gut microbiome is as healthy as it can possibly be. And even if you feel good, that doesn't mean it can't be better.
That's right, always. So one of the things you could start doing tonight is think about what you're eating tonight. So in order to maintain a healthy microbiome and a healthy metabolism, it's best to not eat after dark. So as we get closer,
Why?
Because the body actually becomes more insulin resistant by 8 o'clock.
So this also ties into intermittent fasting or timed eating, rather.
Yes. And intermittent fasting can be done according to the principles of Eastern medicine to make it even more beneficial for one's body long term.
So we're not eating after 8 o'clock. That's number one.
That's number one. Number two is to start incorporating more plant-based foods into your diet if you don't use them already. Number three, take a second thought if you reach for that processed food item. And so anything in a box, a can, or prepared in the freezer, for example, is considered a processed food, even the powders that you put in your smoothie.
I have to think about that one. I must, so much for my protein powder. And what about my peanut butter powder? Are we okay with that?
In moderation.
In moderation.
Just pay attention to how it feels for you.
There you go. And I've been watching the clock, and I have another I have another place to be, as we
Yeah.
said at the beginning. This is fascinating. Again, love chatting with you
Thank you. It was
because
great.
this is the final frontier in some ways in our bodies. We should become more aware of it. We should learn all that we can. And I want to thank you once again. And you know, if you missed some of this and you want more, WNYT.com, go down to health, click over one to Health Beat, and you'll see Bridget there as well. A quick interview with you that you packed so much information into. Rachel, I'm going to hand it back to you. I'll see you all. I've got to get back on air. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Be well.
Thank
too.
you. So audience, we're going to segue now that Benita is needing to leave us into some audience Q&A. So if you have questions for Bridget, please type them into the chat. If you want to ask a question on camera and be part of the recording for YouTube, send a message to me or to Davith and we will let you know, we'll add you to the queue and let you know when you can unmute. And I thought I would kick the audience Q&A question off as an audience member, if I can. Bridget, by asking, how has this work that you've done in this research played out in your private practice and what you do with patients on a regular basis?
You know, I always focused on the importance of digestion, but I found that during my acupuncture treatments, I am definitely focusing more on some abdominal needling and some other points on the spleen channel, for example, stomach channel, to help really boost people's microbiome.
Fascinating. Ami Jo has a question and I'm going to give her permission to unmute. Ami Jo, you can go ahead and unmute.
Okay. I have been reading about the new biology, which I think has to do a lot with the microbiome. But there's some writings about germ theory versus the new biology, or germ theory versus the microbiome. And one of my understandings, and I think you sort of said that, is that if your microbiome is really strong, then we might not have to worry so much about germs or germs getting in. Can you speak to that?
Right. So the idea, what you just asked reminds me of another study. It talks about how, or a new theory. Originally, we thought that we needed to be exposed to a lot of different pathogens in order to train our immune system. But what it turns out researchers are looking at now is more along the lines of we need to be exposed as we come into this world and grow up to more beneficial microbes in order to train our immune system. So in terms of germ theory, that I feel like that's a huge concept that we're coming into now. And what's the second, what else did you ask? I'm sorry.
Like our old thinking was, well, say with COVID, you know,
Right.
if you're exposed to the germs, the virus, then you're going to get it. But the new theory is if your microbiome is really strong, then you can be exposed to something like that and not get it.
Right. So from an Eastern medicine standpoint, what happens when we're exposed to a pathogen is that it's trying to find the optimal environment for it to flourish in. So I don't know, I mean, from a Western scientific standpoint, I don't know many researchers who would say that you definitely just wouldn't get COVID. I'm sure that's possible. But to be more realistic for most of us with the environment that we're in and with the lifestyle that we lead, I feel like the best thing that we can do is try to make ourselves as healthy as possible before we get exposed to a pathogen like that, so that we have more resiliency and elasticity in responding to it. So it's not necessarily about boosting the immune system. Like you said, it's about having a more healthy microbiome. And a healthy microbiome is defined right now, at least, as a diverse microbiome. And what that means is that we don't just have a number of beneficial microbes, but we have many different species of those microbes, so that in the case of coming in contact with a pathogen as drastic as SARS-CoV-2, or in the case of needing to take antibiotics, that our gut microbiomes are more resilient, that yes, some of those species might be killed off in the process, for example, with the antibiotic usage, but there's resiliency because there's a diversity. There's more troops in the background. There's more varied allies that are there that can pick up the slack until that trauma to the gut microbiome is gone, and then those communities can then repopulate themselves. So I think ideally, from like an Eastern medicine standpoint, or a natural or alternative medicine standpoint, what people might be saying right now is that yes, if we have a more diverse, more healthy microbiome, then we will be able to fight off these more resilient pathogens. But the way I like to look at it is that what we need to do is to listen to our bodies and bring ourselves into the greatest balance that we can, because there's no tried and true way to actually measure what the microbiome is in someone's body. We can do a stool analysis, but our technology, it hasn't evolved to the point where we even know all of the viruses that we need to have in our system in order to have a healthy microbiome, for example. So it's very complicated, and that's why I like to bring it into a more simplified space and say, what can I do that I know that any wisdom that's been passed down for thousands of years, that's still in operation today, what can I do according to that to make myself resilient and flexible, so that when faced with such a pathogen like COVID's pathogen, that my body is in the best shape it can be in to be a less habitable environment, to be a less cozy bed for it to nestle into. And that's what Benita was kind of talking about when she talked about the dampness piece, because specific to SARS-CoV-2, from a Chinese medicine standpoint, there is a huge element of dampness present in the makeup of the actual pathogen, which makes it want to nestle into more dampness when it gets in the body, and also create more dampness and phlegm in the body. So if you're already someone that has a high damp constitutional profile, then things that person can do are to eat foods and incorporate activities into their lifestyle that will alleviate the production of dampness in their system.
And what foods might those be?
Well, it's going to be things that don't generate a lot of mucus. So if you eat something and you get mucusy afterwards, then you know that that's a mucusy producing food for you. So we want to be not just eating specific foods, but we need to look at how we're eating. And this is what I really love this book, because I'm able to go into that in the book. And that's like one of my favorite chapters, is talking about how we eat and how we live our lives even, and how that has an impact on the microbiome. So we can eat the quote unquote healthiest thing under the sun, but if we're in a bad mood when we do it, we're not going to digest it much better than if we just had quote unquote junk food.
Thanks so much, Bridget. We've got a question here in the chat from Carol. She says she's read that many people believe that autoimmune problems have their origin in problems with gut health.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Absolutely, yeah, because a lot of what researchers are seeing is that the inflammatory process that gets initiated in the gut affects the microbiome, and it affects the way the immune system responds to different substances, not only that we consume, but that our immune system recognizes as not safe within our bodies, even though it is, like our own tissues. So there's a direct link between the microbiome and between the health of the gut wall, which protects the inside of the body that isn't within the gut from whatever we consume, and between the immune system, which, you know, I like to use the word balance in terms of the immune system. And when it's boosted, it's actually overreacting, and it can be overreacting to proteins in foods, or it can be overreacting to parts of ourselves, and that's the autoimmune problem.
So there's a great question from Anne-Marie in the chat. She asks about what specific foods would you recommend to reduce abdominal bloating and a sluggish transit?
Well, I would definitely recommend more fiber, of course. But that can be a catch-22, because when we consume more fiber, sometimes it can make us more bloated. So if you're finding that you're bloated a lot, what I recommend is that you actually you pay attention to what you're eating and notice if there's a cause and effect between what you've had and the bloating. And notice how long after you eat you feel bloated, because that can give some indication as to whether it's something that's happening in the small intestine or in the large intestine. And simplifying one's food sources while you do that is going to be helpful, so that you're not taking in such a range of things that you're not able to see where it's coming from. So sometimes bloating is actually due to stress, and we call it liver overacting on the spleen in Chinese medicine. It's when the qi stagnates, as Benita mentioned, and it just builds up in the gut, and that causes bloating. And then some bloating is actually physiologically appropriate. So when we eat beans or cruciferous vegetables, for example, that can cause gas and bloating, and that's perfectly normal. It's when the bloating is chronic and uncomfortable that it can be an issue. And so in those instances, I recommend that you pay attention to what you're having when you're experiencing the bloating. There are things that you can do to alleviate it. There's a yoga pose where you lie on your back on the floor and you hug your knees into your belly, your thighs, and you hug your knees into your chest, and you breathe into your belly and press your belly into your thighs as you breathe in, and then as you breathe out, you squeeze your legs in a little tiny bit closer so that they're flattening the belly out. And you do this for several minutes, and then by the time you get up, you should start passing gas. Another thing that people can do is to have some ginger tea about 20 minutes, like a strong raw ginger tea before you have your meals. And then also you can chew on fennel seeds or have cumin, coriander, and fennel tea after you eat.
Thank you so much. There's also a question here in the chat from Kim saying specifically, do you have any advice specifically for vegetarians and vegans?
For vegetarians and vegans, the most important thing I would say is to do your best to have whole food sources of your protein, so that you're not eating a lot of processed stuff. Because there's a lot of fake meat products. So there's like quote unquote junk food vegetarianism. So you want to be mindful of, if you're eating whole, local, organic, seasonal as much as possible is one thing. And then another thing is to have most of your food actually cooked or lightly steamed.
So I'm wondering, as you've been talking, do you recommend food journaling or any sort of way of tracking what you're eating and then what the results are?
I think that's great for people that are disciplined about keeping track of those things. There are many different journals out on the market. I've seen some in Northshire. So I would recommend you could get yourself a nice journal, or specifically a food journal, and keep track of things that way. And I also encourage people to keep track of other things in those journals, because it's not always what we're eating. Like I said, it's how we're eating. Like, did you eat at 10 o'clock at night the night before you got up and you felt nauseous? So that might not be what you ate. It might be the quantity that you ate or the time that you ate. Was there, for menstruating women, keeping track of the menstrual cycle as well is helpful, because you can see changes in bowel patterns throughout the menstrual cycle, and you can see changes in like gas and bloating and things like that. So then you can see which aspects of your digestion are intimately tied to your hormonal cycles as well.
Thanks. I've got one question for you. Thinking about all this microbiome, it keeps coming up with me or in my family a lot. Doctors seem to just go crazy with antibiotics, like all the time for every little thing. And you know, my kids, we've really worked hard to cultivate their gut flora. Is there a, you know, you said, you know, balance and within reason. Is there a good rule of thumb or something you can suggest in sort of in general?
You know, it's kind of a tricky thing, because some doctors want to give antibiotics a lot and some doctors don't. So I think some doctors are becoming more cautious about how much they're prescribing them. But when it comes to kids, it seems like they're more apt to prescribe. So as a parent, I can't speak for anyone else but myself and say that really, my daughter's 5 and she's had a course of antibiotics once. She was prescribed them more than that, but I've been patient with watching and seeing like how she's progressing and watching her signs and symptoms and how she's feeling when she gets sick, and deciding kind of like partially gut, partially, you know, talking to the nurse in the doctor's office and relaying my concerns about administering the antibiotics. And, you know, the one time we had to give them to her, I did it after I talked to her doctor, the urgent care doctor, a veterinarian, because she had been bitten by a cat. So, you know, I feel like with everything, we really need to use our instinct and our intuition and utilize our contacts, you know, people that might know a little bit more about some things than us. Reach out to them and ask what their opinion is on it, and then you can weigh it in. But you know, there are generally things like if somebody has recurrent, you know, urinary tract infections, well, we know that we don't want that spreading up into the kidney. So that might be a situation where, you know, I would err on the side of actually doing the antibiotic. And then in the interim space between antibiotic usage, trying to help cultivate an optimal floral environment in the bladder for that person, so that their own microbiome in their bladder can help to keep those things from happening over and over again. That's just one example. So I'm sorry, that's not an easy answer.
Oh, it's okay. Thank you so much. I mean, we've certainly, as parents, like, well, this one you need antibiotics for, and this thing, yeah, no, you don't really need it.
Right, and that's why it's always good to ask and get more information, I feel. So a lot of times they'll say, you know, well, you can wait. We'll call the script in. You can wait until this or that happens and then take it from there.
So we just got a question from Pernilla. She asks, what should we eat to be happier through our gut when obviously, unfortunately, it can't be ice cream?
Well, I mean, sometimes we can have a little bit of ice cream. Chocolate is good. Cacao is good. Those are all, I mean, it depends what makes you happy too, right? So if you just love turmeric lattes, then, you know, go for it. But a turmeric latte that's 24 ounces is a little bit different than one that's 8 or 10. So keeping those things in perspective is important.
I've got, I guess, also another question. You had talked about the importance of eating fermented foods. Is there, do you ferment your own foods, and is there stuff that you recommend for people starting out?
I have fermented my own foods, and I fermented. I've made my own yogurt from a starter base. A friend of mine is a nutritionist in London, and she's going to be teaching a class through one of the workshops I'm leading later on this month, and it's going to have how to ferment your own vegetables in it, and that is largely selfish because I want somebody to tell me how to do it for myself, because I think that because I eat fermented things, I go and fermented, like if you're going to get a sauerkraut or a pickle or something like that, you want to have something that's salt brined. If you see on the label that it's soaked in vinegar, that doesn't have the active cultures in it that you want. And the other thing is, it's good to get a good starter and make your own yogurt or kefir, because a lot of times what happens is that yogurt gets really processed, and then the starter or the cultures get added afterwards. Whereas if you make your own at home, you're choosing the quality of the milk that you're using and the kind of milk that you're using, and you're able to just do it on your own. And there's something about doing that on your own that also makes it feel more nourishing when you consume it.
So Bridget, your first book was about Chinese medicine and Ayurveda. Your new book that's just out is about using Ayurveda and Chinese medicine to, protect and grow your microbiome. What's next? What's the next thing that you're working on and researching?
I'm still doing a lot of research on the microbiome, quite honestly, because there are studies coming out every single day about it. So I don't know. I've thought about a microbiome children's book or a microbiome cookbook or something. So we'll have to see.
So we've got a question from Kathy Lancy. She said, you said something about the kidneys microbiome. Do all organs have their own microbiome?
Matter. They're finding that every organ has microbes that are resident to it. So, well, I should say most organs. I've read studies about the liver and the bladder. Most places in the body, even breast tissue, have microbiomes, the lungs. And they used to think the lungs had transient microbiomes, and now they're finding that the microbiome in the lungs actually may have a resident community that helps with inflammation regulation in the bronchioles and whatnot. So, yeah, I think they're going to find that everywhere is untouched by microbes. I mean, we are only half human. I say this a lot in the classes about this I teach, and I say it in the book, because I think that that's a huge concept that we need to wrap our heads around, that only 50% of us is actually human DNA. The other 50% is microbes and microbial DNA. And those microbes are bacteria, they're viruses, they're fungi, they're yeasts, they're archaea, they're protozoa, they're everything that exists, the other half of us, which is a direct connection with the natural world. And so if we start to shift our thinking about just exactly what we are physically, it's going to change the way we relate not only to ourselves and to our bodies, but also to the rest of nature. And I feel like that's really important, more so now in human history than ever.
There's another question here in the chat. How do grains factor into our diets? Namely, like, what of the taste categories do they fit into?
Grains are more on in the sweet category, and grains are extremely important for the health of the microbiome. Grains are one of the primary food sources for the microbes in the gut. So I'm not saying that there are people that have a really hard time with grains or that have actual allergic responses to them, but for the majority of people, they don't need to eliminate every single grain from their diet, and it's actually not recommended according to microbiome science to do so.
So we don't have a ton of time left, but there is a question here from Annie. She asks, do you recommend probiotics, especially when antibiotics are prescribed? And what particular ones are best if so?
So sometimes I do. I don't usually go to probiotics first thing with most people. And the reason for that is because you are a probiotic manufacturing organism. All of that, your microbiome, that is probiotic. And some people, everybody's microbiome is completely different. Our microbial signature is as unique as our fingerprint or as a snowflake. So we are all so different. And there's so much they still have to learn about what the active players are in the gut and what they do, that just simply supplementing with probiotics and thinking that that's going to take care of what ails us is not necessarily the answer. So sometimes I do recommend probiotics. Sometimes I'll recommend Saccharomyces boulardii for use after antibiotics, because that's actually a yeast. It's not a bacteria. So when you take an antibiotic, it's not going to kill that. And it has beneficial effects in the body. But there was a study recently that came out, I think of Israel, that showed that actually taking antibiotics with a probiotic it takes the body's microbiome longer to get back to where it was before the antibiotics were administered if you take a probiotic at the same time. So again, it's like a really individual situation. If you're someone who knows that you're going to get like a vaginal yeast infection with the antibiotics, then yeah, you're going to want to take some lactobacillus. But it's a different scenario for everyone.
I'm afraid that is just about all the time that we have. There was a question from Janet in the chat, which I just quickly filled in. She was just asking about her book order. If you ordered from Northshire, we ship them out on a rolling basis as we get the orders. So you should get it fairly quickly, but you can always email myself and Davith at events@northshire.com. We're happy to always check on orders for anybody. And for folks who are here in Saratoga, if you have your book already, if you ordered it and got it already, Bridget is hosting a socially distanced book signing starting in just a few minutes, between 6 and 7 p.m. At Ageless Acupuncture on the porch to Franklin Square. Bring your mask and you can pop on by and have your book signed. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We have a ton of great Northshire live events happening all through October of this month, and on for who knows how long we'll be doing this online. Of particular interest to this group is we are hosting Sharon Salzberg with a wonderful book on meditation at the end of the month. So please come on back. Hopefully we'll see you all again another evening. Have a great night, everybody. And thank you so much, Bridget, for another great event.
Thank you.